Did I maybe compact it all into one slide?
3101 report.
Alright, guys, do you want to start now, or do you want to wait for like more people to come in?
I don't know.
Start now?
Start now.
Alright, awesome. So yeah, we have a bit of a low attendance, which is fine. I can maybe spend a bit more time, if you have any like individual questions, I can maybe answer them. But otherwise, just for the purpose of the recording, I'll just go through some key like tips, tricks, stuff that essentially you would like want to know, like for everyone, just so that you can prepare for the exam better. I'll just close this one. But yeah, so how this recap workshop run is, I'll start off with probably what you guys want to know about best. With the final exam structure, this is just based off previous years, especially from when I did it last year. I have heard that you guys, it is going to be a little bit different compared to last year. If someone could remind me actually, what is like the setup for the final exam?
It's just multiple choice, like on Inspira, and then there's like a cost estimation like question where you like put in the numbers in the box.
Is it just cost estimation, or do you know, like
we have no short answers on
short
like
answers.
content questions. All the short answers are calculations, and all of the multi choices are content.
Okay, yeah.
So now, there's like environmental stuff at the course. That'll all be in multi choice.
The environmental.
Like engineering ethics.
Yeah, that's the one.
Ethics.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's fine. Like, it is definitely it is different to compare to what happened last year. That's fine. I'll still go through it and try and tailor it towards how you guys will sort of look at it in the exam this time round. But yeah, generally we'll just try and like focus on like the modules themselves and what sort of questions will come up. I generally won't go through like exactly what to do for like each question. Like I won't solve them because like this is sort of like open book with the, I think it's double-sided A4, I believe. So that's one reason. Second reason, there's literally no practice questions available for this. So essentially the questions that I have available are the same ones that you guys have, which is workshop questions. I'll essentially say that for the final exam, workshop questions are actually what you might find in the final exam. Like they're pretty similar. Sometimes they might be exact, but in most scenarios it will just be like tweaking here and there. In some cases you might actually like just combine workshop questions for like one big question that assesses like multiple components of a particular module. But in general, that's pretty much, if you just practice those stuff from workshop questions and anything else from Moodle that like, you know, most of you might have said, like this is accessible in the exam, that's just the way to go, I reckon. I don't have too much else to say on what to study because yeah, I just don't have any other practice questions available for me. So we'll go through the modules and then at the end, just some general tips and tricks on how to prepare yourself for the final exam and essentially some other guiding tips that I think would be useful for you guys. So this was like a general structure, which to some extent does fit with what you guys have just said. But yeah, like generally it will be either module 7 or module 8 that gets tested. Rarely they will ask you to like do like multiple of module 7 and 8 just because of like how much detail you need to go in for those questions. There's a disclaimer that they like most of them might put both module 7 and 8 as like a written sort of question. But at least that's what I found from previous years, that they just like he just normally just chooses one, or like whoever does the final exam just chooses one of them. Just to make it easier on you guys, but there is much more of a focus for modules 4, 5, and 6, essentially, in terms of the calculation stuff, because they do require calculations. Modules 7 and 8 really don't have calculations in them. MCQs, yeah, so you guys said that there's MCQs. They're just really assessing like particular key phrases or terminology that was included in the lecture slides or included in like maybe the key learning modules that you do like after every lecture or like within the lecture. Essentially, if you are very familiar with those, I believe it's like similar to what you guys did for the midterm as well, where in the MCQs for the midterm, they like assess particular course content phrases. Similar sort of thing for the final. It just may be you have to apply that key phrase to a particular scenario. Like the scenario says, this is a particular like scenario, and then what phrase is appropriate for this scenario, and then you have to choose out of the 4 options or how many options there are. And yeah, there's more focus for modules 7 and 8 for these, generally because there's a lot of writing involved, so they just sort of chuck that into the MCQ so that you don't need to write as much. And like you won't find as many like modules 4, 5, and 6 in the MCQs. The calculation questions generally have a lot of marks awarded for them just because of how much you need to do for those questions. I mean, now that it's like on Inspera, I'm not entirely sure how partial marks are being awarded. I think because your midterm was also on Inspera, right? So I'm pretty sure it would be just a similar setup of however Merson did like partial marks or whatever he did for working out. But yeah, like in just previous years, like you would just show your working out and potentially like whatever you wrote down, you would just get marks for potential partial marks. But I still believe that the calculation type questions will have a lot of marks awarded for them. Similar for like the written ones as well, but generally the calculation ones are the biggest questions out of the entire exam. So just watch out for those. I've also included a phrase from what I had in the crash course. I believe it still is the same, unless Merson has changed it this year as well. But yeah, like you should know that by now, and hopefully you are able to pass the course according to those requirements. Does anyone have any questions about that, or do you want to move on to the... Alright, so this is essentially what I was explaining beforehand. Again, this is based on previous years. For earth moving estimates / storing and piles, I've decreased the font size for storing and piles, generally because it's less likely to be included. Earth moving estimate questions are literally guaranteed. Like, I'm pretty sure that you guys will get like, I'm sure when you guys did the module 6 like workshop, you did that like earth moving estimate question, which had like the fill, the cut, those sort of stuff. It does take some time to do those questions, so I would assume that Merson would put that in there. However, this is subject to lecturer's discretion. They may instead put a storing and piles question, which I'm sure you guys would have also done in the workshops for module 6. Again, safety and ethics, generally they will just choose one or the other as one of the written questions, just because again of how much you need to write for them. Contract types you will probably see the most of in terms of actually like doing like calculations for them. Like sometimes the contract types, the written calculation part, you do like multiple parts, like it's going to be part A, part B. Sometimes even like that the contract type question might be a part B for a, say, module 5 question about cost estimating, and then it would say like as a part B, like based on this contract there was like these other additional costs that were added, such and such, like what will be the total cost given this. So that's a possibility. But yeah, as I said, the MCQs will mostly focus on module 7 and 8. They may be, like there's less likely to be in module 5 and 6, but again, yeah, don't hold me account to this, please. This is just as a guide. Alrighty, so essentially what I've done here for all the modules, I have copied and pasted from my crash course all the content and slides for like as a summary of what the content was. So right now, what I'll do is just go module by module, and then like at the end of each section of modules, there is like a guide of how to solve questions for that particular set of module questions. But I don't want to go through the content itself again, generally because like it was in my crash course and you also have learnt it along the way. But what I will ask now is if you did have any questions about the content for each of the modules that I can, maybe run through now so that you're familiar with it, or if there was anything that you wanted clarification about for each module. So right now, Module 4 with contract management, does anyone have anything that was concerning about them for that entire module that you want to ask for me? If not, then I'll just skip over to essentially what a particular example question would look like. This was also copy and pasted from the crash course. But what I will go through is the top left question with how it was structured and how you should look at it as the person doing the exam. So essentially, what you want to do is highlight the numbers. So there's a lot of words in these questions that you probably would have seen maybe in the midterm as well for like the wordy questions. What you need to do is essentially just look at the numbers because they literally describe everything you need to do the calculations. Like for these sort of questions, you don't really need to do any like writing as such. So what's the point of writing if it's just numbers that you need? So based off this, you just see like the stimulus that's given. There's just numbers that stand out, like the cost of construction is $750,000. Then it says plus management fees. More often than not, plus just means that you have to read on further to see what that means later on. It just means like it's not attached to that value. There is another value that you need to look at later on. So sometimes words do matter, but in general, like what you want to like write down in your working out is just the numbers themselves. There's other numbers, values there as well. And then obviously you just need to single out what is the question you're answering. So in this case, it's just the total cost of project, including construction cost and management fee. So again, that's an indication that there should be some indication of what the management fee is in the question. And this is where, so this is like, in this scenario, it was question 1, and then there were multiple parts. Like this is straight copied from the workshop. So there were multiple parts. I've chosen one particular part to go over in this recap workshop, but there was obviously other parts that highlighted different contract types and different like values and costs. So for this particular one, what I've done here is part E, they give more information. So this is when they introduce the value of what the management fee is. They've also said that it's the contractor will be involved in 50% of the construction cost. In the construction cost variation, so that's another word, I should have underlined that in green as well. It also says the construction cost increased to $770,000 and the project completes in 290 days. This essentially means that the construction cost is no longer $750,000, so essentially they don't get them mixed up. Like what you can do is just from your head just cut out any unnecessary information. Obviously the 750 might be more necessary for a different part, like let's say part B, but here it's not the focus. I will go through later on why it actually is also important for this question, but just in general, like the reason why there's the red strike-throughs for some of them is just so that in your head, like whatever is unnecessary, just cut it out because it won't be needed for the question. But yeah, for example, a very good example is otherwise he is penalized for $5,000 for each day delay. Part E doesn't say anything about a delay. Like the fact that the project is completed in 290 days means it's been expedited. There's the opposite of delay. So that entire thing is no longer needed at all. But in order to solve the question itself, In reality, you actually do need the 750,000 and you also do need the 300. It's just not, it doesn't stand out immediately, like it's part of the calculations here. So this is the answer straight from the workshop solutions. So this is when you actually calculate the value, the cost of construction. You would use the new value, that's why you would replace the old value with the new value. You would add on the management fee, and then where the 10,000 came from was using the old construction cost, subtracting that from the new one, and then obviously the question itself said the contractor will be 50% involved in it, so it's essentially 770,000 minus 750,000, which is 20,000, and then 50% of 20,000 is 10,000. So that gets removed because that's what the contractor is paying out of his own or his or her own pocket. And then calculating the incentive itself, the question did say it's 1,500 incentive per day, and the 10 comes from 300 minus 290 days. So that's how you get the 875,000 as the total cost of the project. Does anyone have any questions about this particular question or how to analyze similar questions like this for Module 4? Other than that, I think, yeah, like there will be like harder questions out there as well for Module 4, just in terms of like potentially having different types of contracts, and they may assess different like conditions. For example, the condition here was a 50% was being like paid by the contractor. But yeah, just based on that, it's just another case of like looking at the question, seeing what's relevant to the question, and just making sure that every line in the question is addressed somewhere. Like you look at the question and you're like, okay, is this relevant to the question? If it is, have I used it in my calculations? And then just going off that until you reach the last line of the question, like, okay, sweet, that probably is the question that you need to answer. And then from that, you can just get the answer itself, and then just like recheck that as well, so that you know that you've addressed every part of the question and it makes sense. Like another key thing with 3101, you probably would have noticed from when you guys did the midterm, is if the answer makes sense, you're probably on the right track. If you get like negative days, for example, that's a bit of a problem. But yeah, like sometimes it's hard to see if you have like the right answer or not. Sometimes because like you can get like negative like cost. But yeah, it's just a case of like just based on the question itself, like are you expected to make a profit? And then if you get like a negative value, then like shit, need to see where I went wrong. In that case, we can move on to Module 5, similar sort of thing. Does anyone have any questions about Module 5 content? Anything you guys want to clarify with? If not, then you can skip the content itself. I haven't actually put up how to solve a Module 5 question, just because the same applies from when I explain the Module 4 question, in terms of like, okay, you would see from, like, let's say, for example, the bottom right-hand question, like, it's just it's words, but more importantly, there's numbers as well. So you would just single out the numbers that are required. You would also like make sure that the numbers are like similar units. So if there's like something in kilometers per hour, but then everything else is in meters and seconds and stuff, you would just do the relevant conversions. You probably would have known that from other courses you've taken. And then also just converting words into numbers. So the 45 minutes in an hour, like that's just 0.75 when you multiply that to the relevant multiplication sequence. So just making sure, like, that's just like one tip. Like if words make more sense to you, then I can't really say too much. But in general, like for this question, it's just best to work in numbers for everything. And just like having that in as your calculations. Like obviously it might not be assessed because I don't know how partial marks work for this course. But just helping you know how things are going. But then yeah, like words also are helpful, just so that like you know what each number refers to. So like just like subheadings that says, okay, this is the excavator operating speed, like just as like a subheading, so that you know that this is the calculation that I'm making, and when you go back to check your work, like you're not wondering, oh, what was this calculation? And yeah, so essentially like similar process on like how to solve like a module 4 question. Module 5 is similar. These are the ones that you're most likely to have a lot of working out for. Like these are ones that you may take up like a page worth of working. But yeah, generally it's just a simple case of doing like multiplications, like you would have seen from your workshop solutions and any other practice that you have done. It's just very self-explanatory. It's just, there's no real like hidden things other than like maybe if the question had like a secondary sentence that said plus this additional like word, and then that's when you have to also check that particular thing, or if it was included in the original value, then you would have to just separate the two or combine the two accordingly. Anyone have any questions about module 5 questions in general? Yes?
In this question, what is during the balance of the cycle?
So
The bottom question.
yeah, that just is referring to the cycle itself. Like, I think yeah, it's just to summarize it essentially. The part where it's not filling. Yeah, so essentially, when it's being filled, it's working 100% capacity. But then the rest of the time, it's much more idle.
Okay.
And it's working at only 60% of its capacity. Yeah. Any other questions or anything that isn't really, that you think isn't really covered from these 2 questions that you want from module 5? Yep.
Like the year 9, the indices that they look at, is it just limited to like time, location, and size?
Pretty much.
So do
yeah.
they just give like a blank table?
They'll give you that.
Okay.
Like with attached with the question. Like you don't need to bring anything in based on that. No data sheets are needed for those sort of questions. Yeah. Unless Motion is being a dick to you guys, he should have those included. It might have to be like you have to enlarge it and stuff, because Inspiro does whack stuff with the graphics in it, so it'll be a bit of a pain, but I'm sure you guys will be fine with that. Other than that, we'll go on to module 6. Yeah, so this is essentially what I was explaining before. So almost every number will be useful, so take note of them early on. Yeah, so if that's something that you want to take note of, feel free to do that. But that's essentially what I explained earlier. In that case, we will move on to what I would say is probably the hardest part of the back end of the course, which is module 6. Does anyone have any questions about this module from its course content or any other things that you might have seen in the workshops as such? If not, then we'll skip over to the question sides of things. Again, these questions do take up a lot of page, like working out space, and also a lot of time as well. I do remember when I was doing like these questions in the exam, this probably took me about, I'd say, a third of the exam time, especially I think because I did have the question on the left in my exam when I did it. So the particular question itself, I do remember sort of like spending some time not understanding the question to begin with. So that might have taken up some of the time just wrapping my head around what the question was actually asking about. But yeah, it's stuff you would have gone through in the workshop anyway about how to, do the fill, the cut, or whatever is necessary, like whether it is borrow, that like how much needs to be borrowed and stuff. But yeah, so it's like the earth moving section of module 6 is probably the one that's trickier to understand. The shoring and piles questions are actually not that bad. They're pretty similar to like what you would see in a module 5 in terms of just pure calculations, like simple multiplications, additions. I think there might have just been the one little trick of just ensuring, I might have said it in my crash course as well, just ensuring that you have the right dimensions for the particular shoring that is being completed in the question. You don't want to use the, if I recall, it was, there's like the two values of like natural size and like the true engineering size. So you just need to pick the correct one and go with that dimensions, because if you use the other one, then you might have, you know, too much or too little. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, like that's essentially how you would do that shoring and piles question. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about module 6 type questions before? I'll also go through on the next slide how to approach the earth moving type question, because I think, at least from my end, shoring and piles is pretty easy to approach if you know how to approach those type of questions. I think the earth moving ones are just a little bit harder to wrap your head around. So just in general, before I do move on to that, is there any questions that you guys had about other module 6 type questions? In that case, so how to answer the earthwork estimating questions. What I found is pretty good to at least wrap your head around it. It's not too difficult to like address the question itself. It's just understanding what you need to look at in the diagram, because like literally what they'll do is they'll give you that diagram of the question, and you're like, well, what is this? What am I looking at? So the best way to approach it, like if you want to like save time in the exam, instead of like referring back to the diagram and then doing that, on your working out paper, just like re-sketch the diagram in a way that is like makes sense to you. Like I don't think, like obviously they would have gone through this question in the workshop, they would have re-sketched it according to how they like would solve the question. If there's a way that suits you better, I'm not telling you to not do that. Like obviously if it works for you, you get the right answer, well, great job to you. But re-sketching it makes it simpler, and then it also flows on to the second dot point of where you define the vertical sections, because if you have just too many, you're going to confuse yourself and you'll be like, oh, what section is being labeled by this parameter, and you would spend just too much time in the exam trying to figure that out, valuable time that you could use instead to actually solve the question itself. In your working out as well, you would have probably seen that there are little calculations that you need to do based on like other inputs that you have based on the diagram itself. So just yeah, I would just say like make your tables like depending on like what part you're analyzing, which section you're analyzing. Make them big so that you can do extra calculations accordingly. Like if there's another component that says like another parameter, let's just say like this section has 0.9 times of this other section, you can just do that little calculation in the table so that you don't have to like flow on to like a different page, or there's like, you know, your table gets crowded. Like at least that's what I saw from my exam. I think other people have had the same issue where your tables was just so messy. You're like trying to understand what the hell's going on, but it's just not, like you just don't understand it and you're freaking out. So yeah, that's why having a large table helps pace things down. You can fit everything in there and everything makes sense. Finally, this whole course has, I would say, is like you need to double check your work. Like you can make so many errors of just missing a key bit of information from the question that you just haven't included. And if you've just done all this working out and you've missed that, like you don't want to lose that mark. It's it can really determine the answer that comes out at the end. Other than that, does anyone have any questions about how to analyze this, or does anything not make sense? Anything you want to add, for example? Nope. Coolios. And then from what I would say is hard to what I'd say is easy, I've essentially, what I've done here is I've just grouped modules 7 and 8 into one section, and then I'll just go through modules 7 and 8 questions together at one time, because I just feel like there's a chance that one of them could be assessed, not the other, or it's like very similar type question that you would see. So I see you guys are taking photos, so I'll pause here, and then I'll also pause at the module 8 slide so that you guys will know what it is. But before I do move on to module 8, does anyone have any questions about module 7? So yeah, I hope you guys are familiar with what is the content in module 7. That is the content for module 8, just as a refresher. Does anyone have any questions about module 8? Anything you learnt from that content that doesn't make sense? Okay, so I'll skip over that as well. Okay. This was a question that I included in my crash course. Reason being because I don't think there was enough material for a module 7 type question that was included in like the tutorials and stuff. So I just included them there. What I'll do now is just essentially like answer it for you guys. But instead of me answering, I want to hear you guys first. I don't think this particular image or like this sort of style of question will be included in the exam itself, but it's a good indication of what to look out for. Like instead of like an image, they might have like describing words, or if they have an image, it might just be like better quality. Like they have like better things to look at, better things that you can easily identify. But just as good practice, just based off this image, like how would you answer this question? Like just based off what is on the screen, what are some like things that you would write down as your answer? Does anyone want to put their hand up for what they would say? At the back.
First, you will observe like what's wrong with the picture. For example, there is no cover, so the water could easily fall apart. And once you identify the issue, you could provide suggestions to how to prevent them.
Yeah. Do you maybe have any sort of prevention methods?
Yeah, maybe they could make the scaffold a little bit higher so that they cover to the water so that they couldn't fall over. Also, it could also be using other like lifting machine or and maybe not on the scaffold itself.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add?
I was gonna say you could be wearing a harness and actually like strapped in.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be just dependent on the height of the building itself. Yeah, so how about the first part of the question when it says how you rate the condition of the site safety? Like that may not be the question that's given in the exam itself, but it's good to address every part of the question. Like how would you answer that part of the question? Like just sort of rating wise. Like is it good? Is it terrific? Is it poor? Is it shit?
Poor.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything that they want to add to this description? You see anything that stands out? Well, you guys have pretty much nailed it. That's the other stuff that I've added as what I would say is stuff to include. Pretty much, yeah, like harness is also another thing you could add in the PPE to be worn. I would probably say that like it's not as, it just depends on where the street level is, I reckon. Because wearing a harness is like a bit cumbersome if like you're not working at a huge height. But
you can see a roof on the other side.
he's pretty high up. Yeah, he's on like the third story, surely.
Yeah, so it would just depend. Like I think because
There's a roof down there as well.
is there?
Yeah.
I think this like the road is sloping as well.
Mm.
So yeah.
So,
That's okay. Still good to write down. Like in this course as well, it's better to over explain. Like I know there's some courses out there that they deduct marks for like saying the wrong thing, but in this case, it is better to actually over explain. Like if there is something that you feel is correct, just explain it in a way that the marker will like sympathize with you. Say, oh, I understand this guy. But obviously, if you say the wrong answer, they will mark you wrong. Like, if there's like completely wrong answer, then they'll mark you wrong. But yeah, other thing that I would have pointed out was like this guy does seem like he's working alone, which is a bit unsafe. Like there should be hopefully other people around him. They may be in like this scenario, but they're not in the picture. So it's just better to like just write something like that down on the as the answer, so that the marker is on the same page as what you're thinking. And yeah, I think other than that, like those are some very key indications of what should be added to this scenario. Does anyone have any questions about this sort of question or any other considerations they might have based off this? Yep.
So I'm guessing in the context of our exam, the only way this could show up is like in a multiple choice. Because we don't have a short answer.
It could be like a massive written question. Like there's no calculation. Like sorry,
Because
calculation is the
there's
only
no short
thing.
answer.
Yeah, like in that case, there just won't be a picture then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it could come up as a smaller multiple choice question where they may not describe, because they can't describe it in a multiple choice question. They'll just have like a list of, okay, what are some key considerations needed for this particular work site, and then it might have like answers like PPE, and then context of like those emergency services, like all those sort of stuff. But yeah, obviously I didn't know until right now that you guys only have calculation questions to write down. In that case, I'll just quickly cover also Module 8 type questions. These also just copy pasted from the crash course itself. In general, you might, so like yeah, top left is pretty, like it's kind of a calculation question. I know I had that question for my final, but it's not really that much of a like hard calculation question. You might have seen something similar in your workshop questions. But yeah, Module 8 type questions is just assessing the ethics and risks, which again might not be a short answer because you guys don't have short answer questions. So it will just be focusing more on the multiple choice questions, which you might have to do some calculations in the multiple choice. Like you would say like there's a 20% risk for this if this happens, and then there's like a 40% risk if this happens. So that's when you would have to do some sort of calculation to say which one's less risky or which one's more suitable based on the risk itself. And then yeah, ethics similar. It would be just there's no calculations for ethics. That would just be multiple choice as well. So yeah. Bottom right is maybe not as relevant in that case if you're not doing short answer. But there could be the potential that you would have to look at a probability impact matrix, like the impact likelihood matrix, and then make decisions off that as the answer to the multiple choice. Any questions about Module 8, ethics and risks? Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much all the course content gone through and question-wise. So I'll just wrap up with additional tips and tricks. I said most of these in my crash course as well. Just added on as well. Just familiarizing yourself with the basic definitions of each terminology. That's just to help you with the multiple choice questions, because those are the ones that you want to spend less time on, just because A, they're multiple choice, and B, the calculation ones do take up a lot of time. So you just want to breeze through the multiple choice as quickly as possible. That's probably like the best way to go through that. Yeah, so otherwise just like practice. All the practice stuff I would say is like on Moodle, unless you have access to other material at your disposal. And then yeah, like streamlining your working is just to help you know what you're doing. Like obviously partial mark wise may not be as relevant for the marker to look at, but that's just to help you save time, know what you're doing, get to the answer quicker. And yeah, this course definitely rewards effort in terms of how much you study into it. Like the more you learn, the more you practice, the better you'll do in the exam, essentially. Finally, to wrap up, I know you guys said that you are allowed to bring in a double-sided A4. So I've included here as well. What I would say is what you like if you don't know what to put in your double-sided A4, this is what I would say is probably best to have. Obviously, like add whatever helps you first, just so that you know what's comfortable for you to look at during the exam, because it's going to be on your desk. But in terms of if I was to do the exam, what I would put on my double-sided A4, going back to just knowing, like memorizing definitions of particular terminology, just having that so that I could breeze through the multiple choice questions. Earthquake estimating, the question can still, even though I've explained like potentially how to go through that, it can still be very intimidating when you go into the exam. So it's just maybe helpful to just have like on that cheat sheet, like potentially what first initial steps to take. So like diagrams, graphs, and tables from like the workshops and stuff, or like what you've practiced, so that like you're not as intimidated, like you know how to start the question, you know what you should be expecting in terms of this type of question. If you have that in your head already, like that's fine. But I just think it's also like a bit hard to remember. So just having it in front of you as well, like on the side on your double-sided A4, like that's really helpful, so that you can just like not have to remember it before you go to the exam. And then like lastly, there's not that many formulas anyway for the back end of the course. Like it is just churning out multiplications, additions, subtractions, and divisions. The only formula I think that was there was the weighted cost data for module 4, maybe module 5, for the cost estimation, yeah, module 5, which also is tying in with the time factor, the adjusted factor stuff. So having it there so that you don't have to remember it, like I don't think you'll be given a formula sheet, because I did, yeah. But they will give you data, like they'll give you the adjustment factors that are required. If there is any statistical stuff, they will give you like a Z data. I don't think there is going to be that sort of thing, but if they do, they'll give it to you. But formula-wise, they won't give you formulas. So if you want to have that on your double-sided A4, I would suggest having it there. But yeah, and also like yeah, just so that you can save time in the exam, just order of importance, have like those sort of stuff as what you have on the A4 sheet. But again, have it the way you want. You don't have to follow this. It's just based on what I think is best to complete the exam. Does anyone have any final questions about the course itself in general? What the exam might look like? Because again, like it was different to last year, so I can't specify what the exam looks like. Because yeah, last year it was completely on paper, and last year it was also completely open book. Like it wasn't double-sided A4. It was, you could bring in anything. So yeah. I can tell you, I can try answer any other questions you guys have, but otherwise that is the end of the recap workshop. I can stay back if you guys have any individual questions you have, or you want to run through anything with me as well at the end. Yeah. Thank you guys.
This course is so much needed, so it's far.
I've been in business, but
Soils heated 3 weeks of content, pretty much, and barely fitted into 2 hours. And this course you get some of the final exam in not long.
if you
I'll also end the recording as well.